The tow truck didn't arrive with sirens or shouting. It rolled in quietly, like it belonged there, chains clinking softly as if this was just another normal morning in the neighborhood. I was standing on my porch with a cup of coffee when I saw her step out of her car. The HOA president everyone whispered about. Perfect posture. Clipboard tucked under her arm. That tight, satisfied smile that said she'd already decided how this would end. She didn't look at me at first. She looked at my boat. Could have stopped it. One word, one phone call, one argument, and that boat would have stayed right where it was. Instead, I watched. I let the driver hook it up. I let the chains tighten. I let her believe she had won. Because this wasn't about a boat. This was about control. About power. About how easy it is for someone to assume you're beaten just because you stay calm. The HOA had been circling me for months. Parking warnings, vague violations, letters taped to my door like threats dressed up as rules. And she was always at the center of it. Always polite. Always smiling. Always pushing just far enough to see if I'd snap. The setting was an ordinary suburban street, the kind where lawns are trimmed like checklists and neighbors watch through blinds pretending not to care. But underneath that calm surface was tension. Everyone knew the HOA rules. Everyone feared crossing them. And everyone knew that once they targeted you, they rarely stopped. As the tow truck pulled away with my boat, she finally looked at me. There it was, that glance of triumph mixed with something else. Curiosity. Like she couldn't understand why I wasn't angry. Why I wasn't begging. Why I was just standing there, quiet, watching my property disappear down the street. What she didn't know was that every notice, every fine, every step she'd taken was documented. Timed, planned. I wasn't reacting. I was waiting. The real question wasn't why she towed my boat. The question was what would happen when she realized the tow was exactly what I wanted, and that by the time she figured it out, it would already be too late. By the time the street went quiet again, the boat was already out of sight, but the feeling it left behind lingered. Neighbors pretended not to stare, curtains shifted, and somewhere down the block a dog barked like it sensed something was wrong. I stayed on the porch longer than I needed to, not because I was frozen, but because I was thinking. This wasn't the first time the HOA had tested me. It was just the first time they thought they'd finally crossed a line. When I bought the house, the HOA paperwork had seemed harmless. Pages of fine print, polite language about community standards, and shared responsibility. First, it was small things. A warning about where I parked my truck. A note about the boat cover being the wrong shade of blue. Always signed by her. Always delivered with that same calm professionalism that made it hard to argue without looking unreasonable. She had a reputation. Some neighbors called her organized. Others called her relentless. No one ever called her wrong, at least not out loud. People complied because it was easier. Because fighting the HOA felt like fighting fog. You never knew where to hit, and somehow you always ended up blamed for making things worse. What made it personal was the pattern. The timing of the notices. The way violations appeared right after I pushed back even slightly. Once I asked for a rule in writing. 2 days later I had a fine. Another time I requested a hearing. It was postponed. Then postponed again. Meanwhile, the warnings kept coming, stacking up like quiet threats. The boat became the centerpiece. I followed the rules, measured distances, checked sight lines, took photos. Still, the letters claimed it was an eyesore, a safety concern, a temporary exception that had expired. Each phrase was vague enough to bend, sharp enough to hurt, and each time her name was there at the bottom. What she never saw were the nights I spent rereading the bylaws, highlighting sections, saving emails, logging dates. Or the conversations I had with neighbors who whispered their own stories but refused to put anything in writing. Fear makes people quiet. The HOA counted on that. Standing in my empty driveway, I felt the weight of that silence. Losing the boat stung, but not the way she expected. It didn't feel like defeat. Felt like confirmation. Because when someone goes that far, it usually means they think they're untouchable. And people who think that rarely notice the moment the ground starts shifting beneath them. After the driveway emptied, the pressure didn't ease, it spread. The HOA emails started arriving faster, their tone shifting from polite reminders to firm deadlines. Each message was carefully worded, just official enough to feel threatening without crossing any obvious line. Reading them, I noticed how often my name appeared, how rarely anyone else's did. That was the first complication. This wasn't just enforcement anymore. It was focus. At the same time, neighbors began reaching out in ways they never had before. Not directly, not openly. A quiet nod while taking out the trash. A late-night text from a number I didn't recognize, warning me about an upcoming review. One couple invited me over under the excuse of returning a borrowed ladder, then whispered about their own fines, their own fear of retaliation if they spoke up. Everyone had a story, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. That put me in a strange position. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pay whatever it took and make the attention stop. Life was already complicated enough without turning it into a neighborhood standoff. But another part of me, the part that stayed calm when the tow truck arrived, knew that silence was exactly what allowed this to keep happening. The moral question sat heavy in my chest. Protect myself, or risk everything by pushing back? Meanwhile, she seemed to grow more confident. I'd see her driving slowly past my house, phone mounted on her dash, eyes scanning like she was searching for the next violation. Once, we crossed paths at the mailbox. She smiled, friendly and sharp at the same time, and asked if I was doing okay after everything. It sounded almost sincere, almost, but there was something rehearsed in it, like she wanted a reaction she wasn't getting. Behind the scenes, things were shifting. The HOA scheduled a closed-door meeting, then changed the date without notice. A new rule proposal appeared on the community board, one that directly affected boat storage, written in language that felt oddly personal. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about setting a precedent. I started noticing my own flaws in the middle of it all. My patience bordered on stubbornness. My silence, strategic as it was, also isolated me. I didn't tell friends what was really happening. I didn't let frustration show. Control became a shield, but also a wall. And walls, once built, are hard to take down. Late one night, as I reviewed yet another email, I realized something unsettling. She wasn't acting alone. Decisions like this required votes, approvals, a chain of agreement. Someone else had to be backing her. Someone quieter. Someone smarter. The thought lingered as I closed my laptop and looked out at the dark street. The trap I was setting depended on timing, on pressure, on people revealing themselves without realizing it. And if I was right, the next move wouldn't come from me. It would come from them. The days leading up to the meeting moved slower than they should have. Each hour stretched tight with anticipation. Every notification on my phone made my chest tighten. Another HOA email. Another friendly reminder. Another deadline that felt less like a rule and more like a dare. I stopped replying. Not out of fear, but because silence was starting to make them uncomfortable. The neighborhood felt different now. Quieter. Heavier. Conversations cut short when I walked by. People watched from porches a little longer than usual. I caught fragments of whispers. My name, the word boat. The phrase closed session. Whatever was happening behind those doors was starting to leak. Then came the notice. An emergency HOA hearing. Mandatory attendance. No details. That was new. I printed every email, every violation notice, every bylaw page I'd marked over the months. The stack on my table grew thick, uneven, real. Proof has weight. And as I sorted it, I noticed patterns I hadn't seen before. Timestamps that overlapped, decisions recorded before votes were supposedly held. Language copied and pasted where it shouldn't have been. Small cracks, enough to make someone nervous. I saw her again the evening before the hearing. She was standing at the edge of my driveway, pretending to check something on her phone. When I stepped outside, she looked up too quickly. "We just want to resolve this," she said, voice calm, eyes sharp. "No one wants unnecessary trouble." The word trouble hung between us. I told her I'd be there. Nothing more. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed every interaction, every moment I'd chosen restraint over reaction. I wondered how far she'd go to protect her authority. I wondered who would back her when things got uncomfortable. And I wondered, briefly, if I'd underestimated the cost of pulling this thread. Morning arrived gray and tense. As I walked toward the community center, I saw cars already lined up, more than usual. Too many for a simple violation hearing. Faces turned as I passed. Curious. Expectant. Inside, the room buzzed with low voices. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped. And at the front, she stood with the board, posture perfect, expression unreadable. As I took my seat, I felt it, the shift. The moment right before something breaks. And somewhere in that room, someone was about to realize this meeting wasn't about my boat at all. The meeting started exactly how she wanted it to. Calm, orderly, controlled. She reviewed the agenda with steady hands, her voice smooth as she summarized my ongoing violations. A few board members nodded along, not looking at me, not looking at each other. Felt rehearsed, like a play I'd walked into halfway through. Then the first twist landed quietly. A man I'd never seen before stood up near the back. He wasn't on the board. No name tag. No introduction. He cleared his throat and asked a simple question about procedure. One line from the bylaws. One detail about notice requirements. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Eyes turned toward him, then toward her. She answered too quickly. And in that rush, she said something she shouldn't have. She referenced a vote that hadn't happened yet. I saw it register on a few faces. Confusion. A flicker of concern. She tried to correct herself, laughed it off, but the damage was done. The script cracked. The man sat back down. Calm. Almost invisible again. Only then did I realize he wasn't there by accident. He was watching, measuring, and he wasn't on her side. As discussion continued, another escalation unfolded. A board member asked to review the timeline of my violations. Another requested copies of the emails. Suddenly, the focus wasn't on my boat, it was on process, on authority, on whether rules had been bent to fit a narrative. She looked at me once, just once, not with confidence this time, but with calculation, like she was deciding whether to push harder or pull back. That's when the betrayal hit. One of her closest allies on the board spoke up. Hesitant, careful. He mentioned concerns he'd had, for a while now, about consistency, about transparency, about decisions being made outside official meetings. His voice shook, but he kept going. Her expression tightened. Outside the room, neighbors gathered, sensing something bigger was unfolding. Inside, tension climbed with every word. I could feel it pulling at everyone. Fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of choosing the wrong side. I still hadn't said a word, and that silence, I realized, was doing more damage than any argument could. Because now it was clear. This wasn't about an HOA violation anymore. It was about trust, and it was unraveling fast. The meeting was spiraling, and she knew it. I could see it in the way her fingers gripped the edge of the table. The only question left was how far she'd go to stop what had already been set in motion. The room finally went quiet when I stood up. Not dramatic, not rushed, just slow enough that every chair stopped moving. Every whisper died mid-sentence. I felt every eye on me, including hers, especially hers. For the first time since this started, she didn't look in control. She looked alert, like someone who just realized the floor plan had changed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I thanked the board for their time. Then I placed the stack of papers on the table. Emails printed in order. Notices with dates that didn't line up. Screenshots showing rule changes posted after violations were issued. I pointed out patterns, not people. I asked questions instead of making statements. The kind of questions that don't need answers because the answers are already sitting there, staring back at you. That's when the unexpected detail surfaced. The man from the back of the room stood again. This time, he introduced himself. He wasn't just a homeowner. He was an external compliance consultant, brought in quietly by the HOA's own management company weeks earlier after receiving anonymous concerns. Concerns about selective enforcement. about authority being concentrated in one voice. Her voice tried to interrupt him. The chair stopped her. As he spoke, I watched realization spread across the board. This meeting hadn't been an ambush for me. It had been an audit. The emergency hearing wasn't about my boat. It was about her. She looked around, searching for support that didn't come. Even her closest ally avoided her eyes. The decision followed quickly. Not punishment. Not public humiliation. Something worse. An immediate suspension of enforcement actions pending formal review. Authority temporarily removed. Procedures frozen. Everything she'd built her control on paused. But the real twist came after. As the room emptied, the consultant approached me quietly and thanked me for my cooperation. I told him I hadn't contacted anyone anonymously. He nodded. I know. Turns out, the management company had flagged the HOA months earlier. My situation wasn't the cause. It was the proof they needed. And the boat? It was already scheduled to be released. Towed improperly. Paperwork incomplete. No fine owed. I walked out into the afternoon light feeling lighter than I expected. Not victorious. Just calm. Because the trap hadn't been revenge. It had been patience. And the moment she assumed I'd lost, that's when everything finally turned. A week later, the neighborhood felt normal again, maybe more normal than it ever had. The HOA emails slowed, then stopped altogether. The emergency meetings turned into open forums. People spoke more freely, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes emotionally, but without the fear that had once kept their voices low. The board wasn't dismantled, but it was changed. Rules were reviewed, processes clarified. Power finally had limits. I got the call about my boat on a quiet afternoon. No epalegi. Just confirmation. It was ready for pickup. No fines. No conditions. When I saw it again, sitting exactly where it always had, I ran my hand along the side and felt something unexpected. Relief mixed with a strange sadness. Not for the boat, but for how long it had taken for things to be said out loud. Neighbors I barely knew started stopping me on walks. Some thanked me. Others shared stories they'd kept buried for years. The couple with the latter admitted they'd almost sold their house because of constant violations. Another neighbor said watching me stay calm had given them courage. I hadn't planned on becoming that person. I just refused to react the way I was expected to. As for her, she moved quietly. No confrontación. No final words. Authority stripped, influence gone. I didn't feel triumph about it. Just clarity. Control built on silence never lasts. It only looks strong until someone stands still long enough for it to expose itself. Looking back, I realized the real conflict was never the HOA or the boat. It was the moment we all face sooner or later, the choice between peace that costs your voice and discomfort that restores it. I chose patience not because I was stronger, but because I was tired of being small in my own space. If you're dealing with something like this, an HOA dispute, an abuse of rules, or any system that counts on you staying quiet, remember this: you don't always need to fight louder. Sometimes the most powerful move is letting the truth gather weight. The boat is back. The neighborhood is different. And I sleep better now, knowing I didn't win by breaking anything. I won by waiting. If this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And don't forget to speak up when silence starts costing too much.